Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Emily, and I'm the Marketing Director for Clinkscales Elder Law Practice. We have our main offices in Wichita and Hays, and I'm joining you from Hays today, and we serve our clients all over Kansas. We are very excited to bring you this webinar, which you really need to know for the second half of life. Today, we have a special guest, financial advisor Trent Woodcock from Adams, Brown, Beran Ball. Please feel free to send any questions you may have to me in the chat box located at the bottom of your screen. And at the very end of this presentation, we will address any of the questions that you may have for us. That being said, I am now going to hand it over to Randy and Trent to introduce themselves and get us started. Randy?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Randy Clinkscales. As we get started, let me introduce Trent. And Trent, let me get over to the slide about you. So Trent, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, Trent Woodcock with Adams, Brown, Beran Ball, and I am a financial advisor here in our Hutchinson office. And if you don't know a whole lot about Adams, Brown, Beran Ball, we have 14 offices across Kansas, and actually now we have a presence in Arkansas. So we have a large footprint, and I work primarily out of Hutch, but I'm also in Wichita and McPherson and Overland Park, but always willing and able to travel for appointments. Fully licensed, we're a fully independent wealth management group here within the firm, within the accounting firm. Though we're known for tax first, wealth management and investment planning really does become a very integral part of the picture when it comes to planning. So I am very glad to be on board and join Randy, and I will be inputting at different points through the presentation with advice, recommendation, and key points.
Thanks, Trent. And just let you know that actually I have worked with Adams, Brown, Beran Ball for longer than I want to admit, about 35 years. And also they have handled a lot of our accounting and tax work, handled all of it since in the last 35 years. And then also work with the investment advisors here in Hays, as well as Trent in the Hutch and Wichita area. So we really appreciate Trent as kind of my go-to guy on investment issues and understanding of that. Let me just give you a little bit of my background. I am a lawyer in Hays. I had a general practice, was involved in taking care of my grandmother and beginning in 2000. I saw a great need about some special issues that she had dealing with her desire to stay at home. I found a complete lack of resources out there available, a lack of information. And so I began transitioning my office. In 2004, we switched over to nothing but elder law. And as part of elder law, we do a lot of advanced planning. So the idea there is that people don't get caught unaware if they should get sick. You know, it used to be with the estate planning side, it used to be what happens when I die. And we're going to talk a little more about that, but really today the question is really what happens if I live a long time, or what if I have kids that I need to protect even after I'm gone. And so our planning has also evolved into that. And so with my grandmother, it was trying to keep her at home as long as possible. And then as she grew older, eventually I moved her from Fort Worth, Texas to Kansas when she was about 92. And then I took care of her 4 more years up in Kansas until she passed away when she was 96. So our office, and these are the three lawyers with my office really revolves around that model of asset protection. And when someone has a chronic illness, we have care coordinators that work with that family that keep them at home. And as part of that approach, we know that we cannot work in a vacuum. And so as a result of that, we know that we need to bring in not only their health issues and the caregivers, but also people like Trent and other people from Adams, Brown, Beran Ball, or our family's accountant, their insurance person, to be sure that we have a holistic approach to our planning. Let's talk a little bit about what our agenda is going to be today. And I want to hit on 8 points. One is talking about the essential foundation documents that everyone needs to have in place. The second one is how to pay for long-term care. The third one is how to protect your beneficiaries, how to prevent them from their own liability issues. The fourth one is some updates on how to update your beneficiary designation. And that law has changed, and that's terribly important in our planning. The fifth one is what's called the stretch out on IRAs. And again, that law has just changed. And so we'll visit with Trent about that. The sixth one is the opportunity for special needs planning. And so if you've got somebody that has some kind of special needs, and I have a lot of families like that. I have a family coming in next week where the lady's 80 years old and she has a 56-year-old son with Down syndrome. And what's going to happen if something happens to her, and how do we do that planning? And there's some opportunities there. And then we're going to, number 7 is talk about to know the enemy, which is taxes, and how can we minimize or eliminate those problems. And then the last one is care options. And so many people believe that there are 2 care options: living at home, and the other option is being in a nursing home. And there's a lot of things in between, a lot of things you can do to prevent the nursing home reality. And that really kind of brings me to something I want to talk about before we get into the presentation. And that's just kind of what's going on right now. And long-term care is a really good example. Today, if you have a loved one in long-term care, if you don't know it, you can't go see them. We have all of our facilities in Hayes are now in a lockdown because they all have COVID. There are some exceptions for compassionate care, which means end of life discussions. But it's a really different world. And so a lot of times our discussion with families are, how do we stay out of long-term care so we don't get into that lockdown? So let me talk about just, there have been so many changes in the last 10 months. There's been changes in IRA distributions. There's been businesses getting payroll protection loans, and how does that work? Trying to keep people employed. The IRA rules for withdrawals have been temporarily changed, which allows for substantial withdrawals with reduced tax liabilities. There's been stimulus money come out. The notary laws have changed, which allow us to notarize documents remotely, and that's a big deal for us. Zoom meetings like this are just really prevalent. The impact of COVID on businesses and their closing and restrictions on people coming in. Travel bans, can't travel to many countries from the U.S. because U.S. citizens are banned. Whoever thought we would see that? the controversy over masks and controversy over social distancing and gatherings and who can have a group and who cannot have a group. And the reason I want to bring this up is that, you know, it's kind of shaken a lot of our confidence in you know, what we expect is going to happen, because we don't know what's going to happen. And so for me in our office, we've really seen a lot more changes to our documents that will allow us to address certain changes as they come up, things that we didn't expect to happen, like a nursing home being locked down. So let's kind of get into it here. Trent, anything you want to add there before I move on?
No, I'm good at this point, Randy. I'll touch base on some of those things that you just pointed out when we get there.
Yeah. And so I'm going to be picking on Trent as we go along. So let me just talk, you know, to me, I put number one is protect yourself with good foundation documents. And I want to really focus on, before I go on, I also want to tell you, we're going to send you this slideshow. And so I am not going to talk about every slide. So you'll get this, but I want to emphasize some things here. Our goal is to try to finish in an hour and then allow for questions. And if you do have questions as we go along, feel free to put your questions in the chat box. If I feel like it's time to address them at that moment, I will. If I feel like I need to wait till the end, I'll wait till the end. But again, feel free to use that chat box. And I think Emily is down in the bottom somewhere. You just punch on that chat box and type in your, you know, whatever it is your question is. So when I talk to folks about the essential documents, you know, my most important document that I feel like that I need to get done with a family is a power of attorney. And why is that? Because a couple reasons. Under our law, no one has the right to act for an adult absent some type of document that says that. And if you cannot act on your own and you do not have a power of attorney, then, and I'm talking about for either healthcare or financial, then someone has to go to court to get a document called a guardian or conservatorship to be able to make decisions on your behalf. And part of and while that's a way to do it, that is a slow process. It's an expensive process. And most importantly for me, is a very restrictive process. So a guardian or conservator does not have the same authority that somebody with a power of attorney has. With a power of attorney, you can control how much authority your agent has. And so if I have a client with early signs of dementia, but still knows what's going on, you know, I may not even let them leave my office without getting a power of attorney done. And wanted to talk about the power of attorney itself. Under Kansas law, there are, if I give Trent my power of attorney and say, Trent, I give you all powers under the world. Under Kansas law, I've left out about 15 powers. Now, they're not good powers or bad powers, they're powers. And so we like to have a discussion with our clients about, do you want someone to have this power or not? So as an example, do I want Trent to be able to protect my assets by putting them into an irrevocable trust? I can give him that power, or I cannot. If I don't have it in my power of attorney, then he doesn't have it. Do I want him to be able to take care of my wife? Do I want him to be able to take care of, continue to give money to my grandkids or continue contributions to my church? All of those have to be in the power of attorney if I want them to be there. But if they're not in there, then they're excluded. The second thing is that I need to be sure I have a backup to Trent. Today, more than ever, we've had agents get sick, whether it's COVID or something else. And the person, we discover that the person doesn't have a backup. We also run into this problem. We have somebody that pulls a form power of attorney off the internet and they use that. Please understand that my ability to help that family, if that person loses capacity, is defined by that power of attorney. And so if it's a crappy power of attorney, then I'm stuck with a crappy power of attorney. And even if I go to court and get a guardian conservatorship, the court's going to look at that power of attorney and said, well, this is what Randy must have wanted, because this is what Randy put into this crappy power of attorney. So that's the limit that we're going to give the guardian conservator to act on Randy's behalf. So it is really, really key that we have a really good dynamic power of attorney. And kind of understand, you know, the power of attorney I may do for Trent may be vastly different than the power of attorney I would do for his mother. It's according to where we are in life. And so power of attorneys can change based on people's evolution or moving to the continuum of life. So again, power of attorney is terribly important. You can really customize the financial power of attorney. Again, I won't go through all of these, but these are optional powers that you can put into the power of attorney. Let's talk a little bit about the healthcare power of attorney. And again, most people seem to be shocked when I tell them that my wife cannot make healthcare decisions for me unless she has a power of attorney. And there's nothing in the law that says just because she's my wife that she has that power. Again, that power of attorney can be customized. It is customized. As an example, I have in my power of attorney, if I have dementia, that there are certain services that I don't want anymore. So I have in there, if I don't recognize my family, I only want comfort care. And so part of that is an instruction to my agent about what to do, but it's also cover for my agent. And so if my son, Ben, is my power of attorney, and he says that dad's got dementia, he doesn't recognize the family, therefore I'm not going to consent to an operation. And somebody objects to that, but he's got it in writing in the power of attorney. So it provides a protection of liability for that person. Trent, before I move on, I guess I want to go back to the financial power of attorney and see if there's anything there that you wanted to add to that.
No, the big thing we get questions on is can you change beneficiaries and that on with the power of attorney. And the only thing I was going to say, Randy, that sometimes we hear the term durable power of attorney. This is that also known as the healthcare power of attorney?
So that's a great question. So under your power of attorney, if it does not say durable, then upon you becoming incapacitated, it's revoked. And so under Kansas law, your financial and your healthcare power of attorney needs to say durable. And I know it's a technicality, but there's a lot of technicalities in those documents. And so Trent has brought up a really good point. It needs to say it is a durable power of attorney. The other thing I think Trent runs into is, when is the power of attorney effective? And so do we have to declare that the person is incapacitated for the agent to make decisions? And that's really according to the wording in the document. So a power of attorney can be effective right now. So it says, this power of attorney, Trent can make decisions for me right now. Or it can be what's called springing. And so it can say it is not effective. Trent cannot make decisions for me unless I lose capacity. And so that's the springing event. And so how do you determine how do you determine incapacity? And we like to put that description in the document. And so I know in ours, basically we say, if a doctor says, I don't have the ability to make my financial or healthcare decisions, then I am incapacitated. And so Trent, as my financial advisor, trying to decide if he can act, could rely on that letter. Good question, Trent, about durable. The other one is a living will. It's also called the healthcare directive. It's also called the declaration. And that's the document that says that if I have a terminal illness, then I don't want any additional services. Again, that document is, there's a form that you can pull off the internet, but it leaves a lot of holes. And so while the form is only a couple paragraphs, I know the one that we use in our office is about 2 pages long. But understand, only you can make that document. Your power of attorney cannot. Only you can revoke that document. Your power of attorney cannot. Again, we talked a little bit about this the delay, and if you have to go to court to get a guardian conservatorship. You know, our nursing home care costs are, you know, anywhere from $7,000 to $10,000 a month. And so every month there's a delay, you know, in getting the document in place. You could end up going through a bunch of resources. So just, I want to touch on, don't know if I have, talk about wills and trusts. We generally always want our clients to have one or the other, even if they have beneficiary designations. And the reason is that sometimes, most of the time, something falls through the cracks. So what's the difference? A will is a document that says, when I die, this is where I want my property to go. For that will to be effective, 2 things have to happen. You have to die, and then you have to go to court. And unless those 2 things happen, that document is not effective. And until both of those things happen, no one has any power to act on your behalf. So even if I have a power of attorney, when I die, that power of attorney is revoked. And if I have a will, no one has any ability to make a decision or do anything for me until they go to court and get a power of attorney. I'm sorry, and open up a probate case. Trust, on the other hand, are effective when they're set up. So my wife and I set up the Clinkscales Irrevocable Trust, and we put our stuff in there. And so when we die, or if one of us dies, there's not going to be any type of probate. The trustee, which is a person that we've appointed to take our place when we cannot make decisions because of death or incapacity, will just follow the instructions inside that document. So it's similar to a will, other than the fact that it does not require court supervision or require people to go to court. I strongly favor trust. And part of the reason is I don't like the probate process. And I don't like the probate process, Trent, because I have to put on a tie to go to court. So this avoids the tie. And I know you're wearing a tie today, but I'm picking on you.
I just want to jump in. In my meeting with clients, that's one of the biggest points that I come across is that a will does not avoid probate. And I have a number of clients come in and think that, well, I have a will, I'm good. My assets are going to be able distributed, just fine. A will does not avoid probate. So that's why you need to be very, very careful having all the beneficiaries and title work done correctly. And that's what we talk with clients about, titling your assets, or you have a trust in place.
Correct. And I do want to just, and I know we're going to talk about it here in a minute, I'm sure, but there's a whole bunch of different kinds of trust. There's revocable trust, there's irrevocable trust, there's asset protection trust, there's insurance trust, there's a whole bunch of different kinds of trust. But generally what I'm talking about at this stage of our conversation is setting up a revocable trust. And just, again, the bottom line here on these documents is, we want you to plan how what's going to happen if you become disabled, if you cannot make decisions, or if you die. We would like for you to do the planning in conjunction with us, versus if you don't, then a court's going to do the planning for you. And some choices may not be the ones that you would have chosen. I've actually had Trent clients tell me, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to let my kids figure it out. I thought, what a way to really cause a lot of family disharmony. And that's why even in my power of attorney, I'm real specific on what the agent is to do, because I don't want anyone to blame that agent for following my instructions.
Communication is definitely very effective with family and with your decision makers.
Yeah. So again, we want to talk a little bit about how do you protect assets from the cost of long-term care. Again, $7,000 to $10,000 a month for long-term care. I'll be honest with you, I've had a client from Central Kansas that was in a facility because of a brain injury that was paying over $14,000 a month, and that was a couple years ago. I don't know what it would be right now. So in assisted living, $3,000, frankly, is probably too low, but there's a boom in assisted living facilities. So, it's pretty significant. I've listed different ways to pay for care. One is out of pocket, selling assets or your business, and I want to talk with Trent a little bit about that. So Trent, let's talk a little bit about how you pay for long-term care. You want to take it over?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Go back to the previous slide there, Randy. So looking at those different ways there, and we're going to touch on more of it here as we go through the slides, but when that need arises, what have you done to plan for paying for that? And whether it's long-term care insurance, or it's selling off your business, land, or you're self-insured and you have enough in savings. So that's the different strategies that we work with people on for paying for it. And then it gets down to the last couple points there. So going to the next slide there, Randy, one of the things that we really want to look at is the tax liability if you're paying out of pocket, if you're paying with investments. How can we reduce the taxes and be able to stretch that out and give yourself a longer window to be able to pay for that long-term care? And whether it's IRA accounts, which are going to be tax deferred, or whether we're looking at non-IRA accounts, which we call non-qualified money, and then we're looking at capital gains. So what do you sell off first? Do you pay capital gains or do you pay ordinary income from an IRA? And so that's one of the big things that we walk through clients with that strategy of the long-term care. Another thing that we come across is if you do have coverage, what we found out with working with some clients is usually if you bought it 10, 15 years ago, it might not be enough. And then so you're trying to find that balance, and it might only cover $3,000 or up to $5,000, and you got Social Security might cover another $1,200. And so again, it's all about planning. And annuities, the last point I had, a lot of times people have a lot of annuities, or not a lot of annuities, but they have an annuity that they're not sure how exactly that fits into the puzzle, and how can that annuity maybe benefit them for paying for long-term care.
And I want to jump in on that just a little bit, Trent, and I don't know if I've got a slide on this or not, but you know, as a practical matter, like Trent was talking about the older life insurance, older long-term care policies, as a practical matter, most of my clients have to engage in multiple planning steps. So it's not just long-term care insurance. It's not just selling resources. It's really saying this is our plan for stage 1. And if we continue on, this is our plan for stage 2. And so I do think it's really important to understand that sometimes there has to be some layering of the planning. And so unfortunately for me, Trent, many times when people come in to see me, they may have already have a chronic illness that, as an example, is going to prevent them from acquiring long-term care insurance, or makes it prohibitive, or their age is such. And so again, you know, getting Trent involved or their accountant involved and start looking at, you know, a multiple stage approach to paying for long-term care. You know, a lot of my clients I kid with, and I say, you know, our plan would work if you would just do one thing, and they always say, well, what's that? And I said, well, you know, if you would just die, then the plan will work great. But you know, the truth of the matter is, we don't want to die, and we want to try to live as long as possible and as healthy as possible.
That's right. It's never too late to plan, and even if you're in the third stage, there's still things you can do. And the earlier you address it, usually the better off we see in the long run.
That is a really key point. The earlier we can get involved in the process, the much better job, the much more we're going to be able to protect, the much better opportunities we're going to be able to give to a family. Just one thing, a couple things, and I don't. We could do a whole presentation on VA benefits. You know, somebody that served during a wartime, there's something called VA pension that we can sometimes tap into. It can pay up to about $2,200 a month for someone. It's not income to them. They don't have to pay it back. A widow or widower can also get, I think, up to $1,100 or $1,200 a month. There are some real specific rules out there, but we use it a lot to help pay for people in assisted living, or if they're trying to bring help into the nursing home. We probably have 70 or 80 cases right now with VA pension. And it's almost like finding a silver dollar in the bottom of your pocket that you didn't know was there. It's always a really nice benefit for those people that served during a wartime. Doesn't mean they have to serve in the war. Doesn't mean they have to be injured in a war or anything like that. It's a benefit for anyone that served, like in the Gulf War, the Vietnam War, whatever, Korean War. It's just a benefit that we afford to veterans. There are restrictions on income and assets. There are some changes that occurred in 2018, and we can walk you through that process. So as part of this is, long-term care planning and why do it. Again, I think as Trent has pointed out, the earlier that we can get involved, the better. The more opportunities, the more tools that we have. Before I get into, right now we've gone through the last 3 years. We've gone through some major changes in a program called Medicaid. We really try to do a lot of planning around having to ever go on Medicaid. Sometimes we acquire substantial long-term care insurance. Sometimes we put a business into a special type of asset protection trust, and that helps protect it from long-term care. But again, it's trying to provide for your spouse or your children, but you have to be proactive. I saw I'm actually giving a talk on dementia a couple of weeks from now. And the average cost of somebody with dementia, the long-term care costs, is about $350,000 in the state of Kansas. And that's care cost related to nursing home, that's care cost related to the family taking care of that person. And again, that's the average in Kansas. So, planning can be terribly important. Just a slide on Medicaid. Again, that's through something called CanCare. It's not a friendly program, although we do a lot of Medicaid. Kind of understand to qualify for Medicaid, there are some requirements about spending down resources. There are ways we can transfer property over to the well spouse and protect the well spouse. But again, some real strict rules. But we have a lot of families come to us in crisis, and we may have to look at Medicaid, and we have a benefits team that just does that. There is a rule in Medicaid I want to make you aware of that if you give away property, you could be disqualified from Medicaid. And I've never been a fan of giving away property for a couple reasons, but understand that for gifts over $50 a month, that's going to create a transfer penalty if you apply for Medicaid within 5 years. That's 5-year look back. And I want to skip here. We talked a little bit, Trent, about the irrevocable trust, and I think you and I've had maybe a couple cases with irrevocable trust. So that's a trust where we put in resources that we want to protect. The typical case is we put a farm into a trust. It protects the property from creditors. We can still change beneficiaries, but basically we're locking the property away. And then as long as we don't apply for Medicaid, then that property is protected. So it's a good tool. It's a big step that we want to talk with our families about. So I would not want a 40-year-old farmer putting his land into an irrevocable trust, but I might do that with a 70-year-old farmer or someone that had a business or someone who had a large investment account that they wanted to pass on to their kids. Trent, I'd like maybe this long-term care insurance is another way to pay for care. Do you want to talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, the two things that we see with long-term care, whether I'm reviewing a policy or talking to clients about purchasing long-term care, is the old and the new, is what I'm going to call it. And the old long-term care insurance is the use it or lose it, which the term you might be familiar with. And it was probably a lot more popular 10, 15, 20 years ago. you know, you might have picked it up at 60, 65, and you paid a monthly premium or quarterly, and you paid that for the rest of your life until you went into long-term care, or the unfortunate happened and you passed away and you never used that policy. So your premiums of paying for 10, 15, 20 years kind of, you know, almost go down the drain. So again, nothing wrong with those policies. We don't, you know, I haven't sold a lot of those and we don't see it as much anymore. There is still, in fact, a lot of insurance companies are actually getting away from it. There's only a couple that we still use that have that. What it's moving more towards is this hybrid of this protection of, if I don't use it, that what happens to all those premiums I paid in, and can there be a benefit? And so that's what we really look at, of different scenarios of long-term care, which has kind of a death benefit policy with it. And if you pay those premiums, whether it's an upfront lump sum payment at 65 when you retire, or whether you pay that over 10 years or 20 years, there's so much flexibility with them. Of, you know, and you know, easy math here would be, I put in $100,000 over 10 years into a long-term care policy, and at 80 years old, I passed away and I never used it. Well, your beneficiaries or your spouse then is going to receive usually that full 100,000 back, plus more possibly, depending on how it's set up, as a death benefit. So there's a lot of really good things to use, or to look at that approach with that long-term care. The other thing, the last point I have is, some of them actually have what they call and I've seen other old policies have that also, but an inflation protection, where when you do start using it, then it's going to go up a little bit each year. Your benefit is to help pay for those increasing costs with long-term care. So again, every client situation is unique and different, and so that's where we just address what do you need and what's going to fit for you.
And Trent, I'm going to move along here a little bit quicker, but I will tell folks on this phone call, I really push people toward the hybrid policies. I really like them, and again, I have a traditional long-term care policy, but I wish I had the hybrid. But I bought mine about 12 years ago. One of the things that get asked of me is about just putting their kids' names on their assets. There are some issues that I have there. I expressed earlier, I have a problem with gifting. Just understand that if I put something in my son's name, then if he gets divorced, or if he has debt or disability, or he dies, then whatever I've given him could be at risk. I could lose it. You can't get it back. And so I really struggle with that, with gifting away property. The other one, our third bullet point here is minimizing others' liability. And again, part of it is, who are you trying to protect? And so I was sharing with Trent earlier that, I have a client with a disabled son that we're setting up a trust inside a trust called a supplemental needs trust. But that allows us to protect that disabled son assets from predators, from long-term care costs, a lot of things. So these are just different ways, different types of trusts that we could be looking at using. We talked about the income protector trust. That's where we put property into an irrevocable trust, but continue to get the income from it. Then number 4, this is kind of an important one, update beneficiary designations. And again, these are a couple changes that were pretty important. The Secure Act, January 1, changed distributions to 72. So you don't have to take money out of your IRA until you're 72. There's a stretch out change. I'm going to have Trent talk about that. Trent, why don't we, let's go ahead and talk about that just a little bit, because I do think this is really important.
Yeah, that was a big thing with the Secure Act. What changed is if an IRA or qualified money is passed down to a non-spouse, before last year of 2020, if that child inherited that IRA account or children, they could stretch that out over their lifetime. And really, with good investment growth, that would never go away depending on how they used it. And so what changed now is the 10-year rule. If it's a non-spouse, you have 10 years to get that money out of the IRA. You don't have to do it. There's not a minimum each year like what it used to be, but it falls under that 10-year time frame to take that out and pay taxes on it. So it is about getting the money out, paying the taxes on it. So that's something to think about and address with your beneficiaries if they are a non-spouse. Same rules still apply for the spouse. Is you're allowed to, you can inherit it, or you can continue on with the RMDs and stretch that out over your lifetime.
And again, a lot of, all of our files, we're going through them and talking with our clients about this change in the rule. Part of it is, just to let you know the background, this generation, my generation and so forth, is that there's the largest transfer of wealth that we've ever seen in our the history of our country, and they want to get that money out in circulation. And so this is a big tax change to force this money out over 10 years. And then let's talk about the CARES Act. And again, the CARES Act was something that was passed as a result of the COVID crisis. Trent, you want to just touch on that quickly?
Yeah, this was passed there in April. This applies to kind of emergency needs. If you need money and need to take it out of an IRA, they waive the 10% penalty if you take the money out before December 31st of this year, and you have 3 years to pay that tax bill. If you're over 59 and a half, there can be some planning there involved. It might not affect you as much. If you're under 59 and a half, there's obviously a little more planning. But if you want to pay it back within 3 years, and you don't have to be earning, you don't have to have earned wages, you can certainly do that if you have other money coming elsewhere. You might have to go back and amend a tax return because the 3-year spread out, you're still going to pay back. You're going to start paying back in year 1 on taxes. But if you wait till year 3 to pay it all back, then you have to go back and amend your first year tax return. So again, it's visiting with an accountant, a financial advisor to know what you're doing, whether it's a 401k that you're taking it out of, which applies, or an IRA, or an annuity that's under an IRA rule.
And I know that a lot of people may think, well, this is very isolated, but we probably have 10 to 15 cases right now where we're going through this analysis of whether this is the advisable thing to do. And primarily it's because of some Medicaid rules that we're trying to get around, and what's the impact if we cash out an IRA and transfer it over to the well spouse. So it become important. Trent, I know you want to talk a little bit about this one, just the idea of putting everything together in a holistic planning.
Yeah, and so full disclosure, I'm not an attorney, right? And that's why we got Randy on the line. And I work within a CPA firm, and so I'm though I am fully licensed investment advisor, it becomes a team approach when you start planning. And I think that's the biggest thing Randy and I wanted to address. And so I always use the term holistic planning, and there's different pieces of the puzzle that have to fit together, and they might not all fit together at once, but we do want to look at the insurance side. We want to look at whether it's life insurance or long-term care insurance. We want to look at the tax planning that comes with that. the estate planning, which we're addressing with trusts and wills. And so it's not just depending on one person to answer all your questions. It's using different resources and to make sure you got the best plan in place. And that's the biggest thing that when it comes down to retirement planning. Yeah, my specialty is the investment piece and the investments and your risk in the stock market, but there's a lot more to it than that.
Trent, I don't know if you've ever noticed our logo for our office, but it is actually the puzzle pieces. And again, I agree with you wholeheartedly, getting everybody involved in that process. The one thing that's unique about our meetings with clients is that many times we ask them to bring in anyone that's important to them in the decision-making process. And that could be a kid, it could be an investment person. It's whoever needs to be understand exactly what we're trying to get done. And the other thing is that, investment stuff Trent knows a lot more about than I do. And I don't need to be stepping on some landmine without, asking Trent how to avoid that. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. We've talked a little bit about this already. Beneficiary designations are really important. I discovered somebody the other day with about $1 million between IRAs and investments that had no beneficiary designations at all. And he's going to make some probate attorney really, really happy because they're going to collect a percentage of that in the probate process, and it all could, and then the IRS is going to be happy because there's no beneficiaries and everything's going to go to an estate and on and on and on. And so it was a perfect scenario for some bad decisions. Again, typically if we've got somebody in a nursing home, we really don't want them to be part of our beneficiary designation, or somebody with a chronic illness or special needs. And so we like to plan around that if we can. Again, somebody with got a child with special needs or a spouse that's chronically ill, we may want to provide some type of protection for that person so they never run out of money. Number 5 trend is understanding the stretch out. Again, you've kind of already talked about that. Just a thing I want to hit on is you need to name a beneficiary of a retirement account. And if you don't, then it's going to go to your estate, which is going to cause a forcing out of all of the money at one time, paying all the taxes that year. If typically we don't name a trust as a beneficiary, but there are exceptions to that rule, such as somebody with a special needs. I do want to point out to you, and I'm not going to go into this, I do want to point out to you that under the changes that your spouse, if you leave your IRA to your spouse, she does have required minimum distributions. If you leave it to one of your kids, there are no required minimum distributions, but it has to be paid out in 10 years. Am I saying that correctly, Trent?
Correct. Yeah, they don't have to take it out, but they have a 10-year window to withdraw all of it, and so that's very important to know from a non-spouse beneficiary.
And so the question for many of my clients is, do they want their kid to have access to all this money in 10 years? And how can we prevent them from losing that to a divorce or some other issues? And so that's a circumstance where we may actually use a special type of trust for that kid.
And real quick, Randy, there's some other planning that we do. It could be what they call a Roth conversion, and it's all about tax planning. It's, hey, if this money is going to go to my children, is there ways to get it to a Roth so my children don't pay any taxes and it's all tax free? Yes, there is. It takes a lot of planning, but it can be done.
Yeah, and Trent, you and I talked a little bit about that. We've got some older clients where it may make a lot of sense for them to start rolling stuff out into Roths, and they reduce their kids' tax liabilities later on. So, special needs planning, we've talked about this. One of the exceptions to the 10-year rule is if you leave a IRA to a person with special needs, then they can still stretch it out over their lifetime. And so again, special needs planning is a way to protect someone and be sure that they have money for the rest of their lifetimes without them losing it to long-term care costs or Medicaid or any other type or a lot of them, so they can't get scammed. And so it's a really nice way to engage in protection for somebody with special needs. To talk a little bit about taxes, federal estate tax, right now we're up to $11.5 million for an individual. That's the exclusion. However, we still have capital gains taxes. And so selling assets we talked about selling assets to pay for long-term care, and Trent talked a little bit about, we need to balance that. Is it wise to sell something and incur those capital gains taxes? I don't know, Trent, anything you want to add to that?
No, the big thing is the step up in cost basis. If there's a way to, if you have large gains, whether it's land or some investment or stock, and you want to avoid the tax, it's how do we get that without gifting it? How do you get that to the beneficiary so they can avoid the tax? And so that's that's the big thing that you want to look at.
Yeah, and sometimes, again, go back to the irrevocable trust. I mean, that's a great way to do that. So we still get a step up in basis. You can even give the beneficiary the income, but you really don't want to have to pay those capital gains. One thing we've run into, Trent, I know it seems like a little issue, but the healthcare surtax, if they sell a bunch of property and they get over, I think it's about $250,000 in income, then there's going to be a healthcare surtax on top of that. The other thing is that income's going to push their Medicare way up. So sometimes we run into issues, Trent, in long-term care where somebody cashes out an IRA and then it pushes up their Medicare premium, from $140 to close to $500 a month. Well, that's a shocker for a lot of people when that occurs. And so if we can spread that out over multiple years, then it can be a real savings for someone.
Yeah, and it's about talking to somebody before you make a decision. And real quick, Randy, I just had an instance that I thought of when you were talking where I did have a non-spouse just inherit an IRA August 9th, and it was $250,000. And they took it out, and they took a lump sum. And so that put her into a 28, 26% tax bracket. She couldn't put the money back in. And even the 60 on an inherited IRA, the 60-day window, there's a lapse. And so if she would have talked to us August 8th, we could have saved her $100,000 in tax.
Right.
So huge.
So my final topic that I want to talk to you about, care options. Again, you know, we really like to talk with our clients about how can we stay at home. That is probably the most important issue in our office, is how can we stay at home? How do we pay for care at home? What are our options that can help us stay at home to be safe? I know with my mother-in-law, we hired a woman to come in and live with her, more of a companion-like arrangement, but it allowed her to stay at home a few more years. Home alert systems and the like, adult daycare. You know, we a lot of times we run into caregiver burnout, and so we have a loved one trying to take care of somebody with dementia, and so we want to walk them through some alternatives that may be out there that'll, if they want to continue with that arrangement, how can they get a break? What kind of support system is in the community? How can they tap into that? How do they pay for that? Or is it free? You know, just different things like that. But we really want people to be aware that there's not just the home and the nursing home. There's a lot of things in between. You know, with my grandmother, you know, I took care of her for 10 years, and she was on hospice twice and so forth, but she only spent 50 days in a nursing home. And so we really, you know, that was really the emphasis of all of our planning, you know, all these things that we've talked about with Trent and with you today. The real emphasis was how do we keep her at home and let her make decisions as long as possible. So Trent, we're kind of at the what's the next step. I'm going to have Emily come on here in a moment and talk about this. But one of the things I guess I want to emphasize here is that you know, my experience has been that somebody is going to be on this call, and you know, a year or two from now, they're going to call back and say, you know, I should have done something right then. And so I really, you know, Trent gave a really good example of somebody just missing by a few days an opportunity to protect resources with this IRA and save $100,000. That's a really good example. And I could give you a whole bunch of stories like that, but really want you to take some action, whether that is with me or with Trent or with someone else. But I really wanted to raise these issues with you. It's a different world than it was 10 months ago. I've just never seen so many changes and so many uncertainties. But I do believe that you've heard Trent and his background and his knowledge with my background and our knowledge. I think that we can provide great guidance for families that are trying to get planning in place. So Emily, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you tell the folks what to do next.
All right, thank you, Randy, and thank you, Trent. And it doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat box at this time, so we will kind of work on wrapping up right now. Thank you everyone so much for your participation today. We hope the information that we provided was really helpful for you. Please go ahead and be on the lookout for a follow-up email from us here at Clinkscales. That email will include a survey link with your free consultation with us and giving you some options to send you additional information and resources. So I'm also going to put that link in the chat box now, so you can go ahead and complete that right now if you wish. The email will also include a recorded video of this presentation, as well as the PowerPoint itself, like Randy mentioned earlier. Our contact information will be provided on that email, as well as Trent's information from Adams, Brown, Beran Ball, so you can reach out to either of us if you have any questions at all. So at this time, you can please feel free to unmute yourself. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask Randy and Trent right here on the line, they'd be very happy to answer anything for you. So you can just leave that open for a minute or two. Otherwise, feel free to hop off and have a great rest of your afternoon, and keep an eye out for that follow-up email that will have this information and the contact information if you have any questions at all.
And Emily, I just want to emphasize that anyone that returns a survey is going to get a book that I co-authored, What You Need to Know for the Second Half of Life, which has a lot of great information in it.
Yes, absolutely. So it doesn't look like we have any questions or anything right now, so we'll go ahead and finish up. And thank you all for your attendance, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Trent.
Thank you so
Thank you, Randy. Thank you, everyone.